At 19, Daniel and Rose Harper had been married for 47 years. They had raised 3 children, built a successful hardware store, paid off their home. Then everything disappeared. A chain retailer opened across the street. Sales collapsed. Medical bills followed after Daniel's heart surgery. Within 2 years, the bank foreclosed on both the business and their house. The auction lasted less than an hour. Neighbors watched from the sidewalk. Some waved awkwardly. Most looked away. As Daniel loaded their last suitcase into an old pickup truck, a man quietly muttered, "Imagine losing everything at their age." Rose heard him. She simply squeezed Daniel's hand. "We'll start again." They spent several weeks sleeping in the truck behind a campground. Every morning Daniel repaired small engines for cash. Rose baked pies for local diners. Together they saved exactly $10. One rainy Tuesday they attended the county surplus auction. Not because they expected to buy anything, because the building was warm. Most of the auction featured abandoned warehouses, vacant lots, and condemned buildings. Then the auctioneer announced the final property. Lot 39. The screen displayed a massive brick trolley barn built in 1908. Its roof had partially collapsed. Floodwater covered nearly half the floor. Broken trolley tracks disappeared into muddy darkness. Every window was shattered. The old place had stood abandoned for decades. The auctioneer sighed. Opening bid. $10. Silence. Someone laughed. "That place floods every spring. You'd spend more pumping it dry." Another bidder shook his head. "It ought to be demolished." Rose looked at Daniel. "I love old brick buildings." Daniel smiled. "So do I." He slowly raised his bidder card. "I'll bid." The room burst into laughter. The old couple bought the swamp. They'll be bankrupt before tomorrow. The gavel struck. Sold. $10. Daniel and Rose became owners of the county's forgotten trolley barn. The following morning they unlocked the rusted steel doors. Cold air drifted through the enormous building. Floodwater reflected sunlight pouring through broken skylights. Rows of steel support columns stretched into darkness. Ancient trolley rails disappeared beneath shallow water. Despite everything, the structure remained magnificent. Rose smiled. "Can you imagine this place 100 years ago?" Daniel nodded. People everywhere. They got to work. Using borrowed pumps, they slowly removed the floodwater. They repaired sections of the roof with reclaimed metal. Volunteers from a nearby church occasionally helped clear debris. Every evening the old trolley barn looked a little less forgotten. One afternoon, an elderly retired transit engineer named Harold stopped by. "You two actually bought this place?" Daniel smiled. "We did." Harold slowly walked across the old tracks. "I worked here before the last trolley ran." "You did?" He nodded. There was always something unusual about this building. "What?" Harold stopped beside the western brick wall. He tapped it gently. Unlike the surrounding walls, it echoed. "Hollow." He frowned. "That shouldn't happen." Rose looked surprised. "You think there's something behind it?" Harold smiled. "I always wondered." Before leaving, he quietly added, "People have tried buying this barn for years." Daniel laughed. "This flooded place?" Harold nodded. "More times than you'd believe." "Did anyone ever explain why?" "No. They always asked about the western wall." That evening, Daniel couldn't stop thinking about those words. 3 days later, a black luxury SUV rolled into the parking lot. A sharply dressed woman stepped out. "My name is Victoria Sloan." She smiled politely. "My company would like to purchase your trolley barn." Daniel looked around. "This building will offer $3 million. Rose almost dropped her toolbox. "For this flooded barn?" "Cash." Daniel shook his head. "No." Victoria remained calm. "If you reconsider." She placed a business card on an old workbench. "Call me." Then she left. 2 days later, another representative appeared. Different company, different offer. $7 million. Again, Daniel refused. Now they knew. The trolley barn wasn't valuable because of the building. Something inside mattered. That evening, Daniel rolled an old steel scaffold beside the western wall. He examined every brick. Most appeared original, except one perfectly square section. Its mortar looked decades newer. He tapped it. The hollow echo returned. His heartbeat quickened. Using an old masonry chisel, he carefully removed several loose bricks. Behind them appeared, not empty space, a heavy steel door hidden inside the wall. At its center rested an ornate brass lock. A faded leather pouch hung from a hook beside it. Inside rested a brass key and a folded note. Only 5 words appeared. Follow the tracks below. Daniel inserted the key. A deep metallic click echoed through the trolley barn. The hidden steel doors slowly swung inward. Cold air rushed outward. Behind it stretched a narrow staircase descending beneath the old trolley rails. Rose whispered, "This was here all along." They grabbed flashlights. Every instinct told them to leave. Instead, they climbed down. The staircase opened into an enormous underground chamber. Daniel stopped breathing. Concrete walls, steel support beams, industrial generators, climate-controlled archive rooms, shelves packed with leather-bound journals, historic engineering blueprints, transit maps, property deeds, rows of locked filing cabinets. This wasn't an old maintenance tunnel. It looked like a hidden command center. At the center stood a massive oak table. One envelope rested there. Across the front, written in elegant handwriting, were 4 words. For Daniel and Rose. They looked at each other in disbelief. Rose slowly opened the envelope. The first sentence made both of them freeze. "If you've reached this room, then the people trying to buy the trolley barn have probably found you already." Trying? Why? Before Rose could continue reading, a low engine echoed faintly overhead. Then another. Then another. Daniel hurried toward an old security monitor mounted on the wall. The screen flickered to life. Outside the trolley barn, 3 black SUVs had just entered the flooded yard. 6 strangers stepped out carrying surveying equipment and locked aluminum document cases. They weren't looking at the roof. They weren't inspecting the tracks. They were walking straight toward the hidden brick wall. Daniel's pulse raced. 3 black SUVs stood outside the trolley barn. 6 strangers climbed out. None carried restoration equipment. None looked interested in preserving history. Each carried surveying instruments, radios, and heavy aluminum document cases. They weren't searching for the building. They were searching for what had been hidden beneath it. Rose turned back to the letter. Her hands trembled as she continued reading. "If they've arrived, then they finally discovered what we spent 50 years protecting." She swallowed. The next sentence stopped both of them cold. "This underground archive isn't your inheritance." Daniel frowned. If the archive wasn't the inheritance, then what was? Rose continued reading. 50 years earlier, the city's chief transit engineer, William Harper, had overseen construction of the electric trolley system. While mapping underground tunnels beneath downtown, he discovered something extraordinary. Not buried gold, not forgotten cash. An enormous network of reinforced transportation tunnels connecting nearly every historic district beneath the city. Most had never been completed, but the tunnels crossed land that later became some of the most valuable commercial property in the county. Developers quietly realized whoever controlled the original tunnel easements could influence future underground infrastructure worth hundreds of millions. William refused to sell. Instead, he quietly purchased the abandoned trolley barn and transferred every underground easement into the Harper Transit Trust. Every engineering survey, every tunnel blueprint, every property easement, every document exposing decades of fraudulent land purchases. Everything remained hidden beneath the old trolley barn. The flooded building had never been the treasure. It had simply protected the entrance, waiting for the right people, waiting for Daniel and Rose. A modern valuation report slipped from the folder. Estimated value of the Harper Transit Trust, $341 million. Daniel stared silently. $341 million. Not because of the barn, because the trust legally controlled the underground transportation easements beneath much of the historic district. Above them came heavy footsteps. The strangers had entered the trolley barn. William's letter continued. The trust transfers only to those who restore the barn before learning its value. Rose smiled. Without realizing it, they had already passed the test. Instead of tearing the building down, they repaired the roof, pumped out the floodwater, and saved a piece of history. The next pages contained original deeds, transit maps, engineering reports, environmental studies. Everything had been preserved with extraordinary care. Then Daniel noticed another envelope. Smaller, addressed simply. My friends. He opened it. If you're reading this, then life has probably tested you more than you ever expected. His eyes filled with tears. I wanted this trust to belong to people who understood what it meant to lose everything and still choose to rebuild. Rose quietly squeezed his hand. The letter continued. Money can purchase buildings. Only character restores them. When I learned that an elderly couple spent their last $10 saving a flooded trolley barn everyone else mocked, I knew the waiting was over. Daniel looked at Rose. Neither could speak. The final paragraph read, "You restored hope before discovering wealth. That is why this belongs to you." A voice echoed through the underground chamber. "The archive's open. Find the documents." William's final instruction appeared at the bottom of the page. "Leave through Tunnel 7. A blueprint showed a concealed passage behind the power generators. Daniel quickly packed every deed, blueprint, journal, survey, and trust agreement into waterproof cases. He hurried toward the rear of the archive. Behind several electrical panels stood a large steel wheel. He turned it. A section of the concrete wall slowly slid aside. A narrow tunnel stretched into darkness. Behind them, another voice shouted, "They're escaping." Without hesitation, Daniel and Rose entered the passage. The tunnel followed one of the original trolley routes beneath the city. Old steel rails still rested beneath their feet. After nearly 30 minutes, daylight appeared ahead. They emerged inside a beautifully preserved but forgotten streetcar station beneath an abandoned railway depot on the opposite side of town. Waiting inside sat a wooden desk, a satellite phone, fresh batteries, and one final envelope. William had planned every detail decades earlier. Inside rested attorney Margaret Lawson's business card. Beneath it, one handwritten sentence read, "Call immediately." Daniel picked up the satellite phone. Margaret answered before the second ring. "Daniel Harper? You knew we'd call? We've been waiting for this moment for nearly 30 years. Margaret explained everything. William had legally established the Harper Transit Trust decades earlier. The moment Daniel and Rose recovered the original archive, ownership automatically transferred to them. At exactly the same time, encrypted legal notices were delivered to transportation authorities, environmental agencies, land registries, and financial crime investigators. The people searching the trolley barn weren't preservationists. They represented shell corporations that had spent decades attempting to illegally obtain the underground easements. William's archive documented everything: forged deeds, corporate bribery, illegal property transfers, money laundering, hidden ownership agreements, every fraudulent transaction. Within days, search warrants were executed. Corporate offices were raided. Executives were arrested. Fraudulent easement claims were canceled. The Harper Transit Trust retained permanent ownership of every protected underground corridor. Months later, engineers confirmed Williams' original vision. The tunnels could safely support modern utilities, pedestrian walkways, and transit improvements without damaging the historic district above. Reporters expected Daniel and Rose to sell everything immediately. Instead, they surprised everyone. The trolley barn became a transportation museum and community market. The underground station was restored for public tours. Revenue from carefully managed easement agreements funded affordable housing for seniors, scholarships for trade apprentices, and grants to restore historic buildings throughout the city. Exactly the kind of second chance Daniel and Rose had once desperately needed. 1 year later, visitors filled the restored trolley barn every weekend. Children explored beautifully restored streetcars. Local musicians performed beneath the towering brick arches. The once flooded building had become the heart of the neighborhood. Most people believe the elderly couple became wealthy because they bought a flooded trolley barn for $10. That wasn't the real story. The trolley barn wasn't the treasure. The underground archive wasn't the treasure. Even the Transit Trust wasn't the greatest inheritance. William Harper left them something far more valuable. Proof that dignity doesn't disappear when fortune does. That rebuilding is more powerful than giving up. And that sometimes the people everyone laughs at become the very ones who preserve history for generations to come.